September 13, 2012. Number 1. First test is next week. Notes on Chapter 3 and Intro to Chapter 4 will be next on the agenda, in-class activity, and finally your 20-point quiz. The first test will be on the 20th of this month, next Thursday. It will be worth 50 points. There will be multiple choice, matching, fill in the blank, and short answer questions. It will cover from materials from Chapter 1 and 2 and from what we did in class. The learning targets for today's lesson include being able to say I can, list and describe key legislative acts in governing pharmacy practice, describe the role of government agencies in pharmacy practice, describe restrictions on over-the-counter and controlled substances, describe the process of an FDA drug recall, and explain how medical and pharmaceutical technology or terminology is created. The Food and Drug Act of 1906, it prohibited interstate commerce in the adulterated or misbranded food, drinks, or drugs. Government pre-approval of drugs is required. The 1914 Harrison Tax Act responded to the increase in opiate and cocaine-containing medicines. Pharmacists and doctors needed to be licensed to prescribe and dispense these medications. The 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act responded to the fatal poisoning of over 100 people, mostly children, by untested sulfonamide concoction. New drugs need to be shown to be safe before they're marketed. In 1951, Durham-Humphrey Amendment defined which drugs needed the prescription label caution. Federal law prohibits dispensing without a prescription. The 1962 Cofer-Harris Amendment needed to prove that the medication was both safe and effective before marketing. The 1970 Poison Prevention Packaging Act, child-proof caps required on all controlled and most prescription drugs, unless non-child-proof caps requested by either the doctor or the patient. The 1970 Controlled Substances Act, the DA was established after CSA classifies 5 levels of controlled substances. The 1983 Orphan Drug Act provided incentives to promote research, approval, and marketing of drugs used to treat rare diseases. The 1990 Anabolic Steroid Control Act was passed to address the abuse of steroids by athletes, especially children and teenagers. New drug approval. The picture essentially shows all drugs require FDA approval and must be proven to be safe and effective. Animal testing is a balancing act. You want to use as few animals as possible and treat them humanely, and different species are used for different drugs. Testing on humans occurs in 3 phases: Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. Phase 1, 20 to 100 patients over several months. It's mainly for safety. Phase 2, up to several hundred patients over several months to 2 years, mostly for effectiveness, but also short-term safety. And finally, Phase 3, several hundred to several thousand patients for 1 to 4 years. Safety, dosage, and effectiveness is tested. In a test, you'd have a placebo versus the active ingredient. Behind-the-counter, over-the-counter medications was a result of the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act. It required some OTC cold and allergy medications to be kept behind the counter, and it set limits to how much can be bought at a time. Stock labels. This is a picture of a stock label. Dispensing prescription labels. A number of things are required. In this particular example, you have prescription number is A, B is prescribing doctor, C is the date, D is the patient name, E is the medicine and the dose, F is the store, G is the quantity, H are refills, I is the manufacturer, J is expiration date, and finally K are the instructions. Controlled substances. You have 5 scheduled substances, with 1 being unused because it does not have a medical purpose and is highly addictive. all the way down to Schedule 5, which is used and oftentimes over the counter. The Drug Enforcement Agency is there to enforce the controlled substances laws and regulations of the United States and bring to criminal and civil justice system in the United States any other competent jurisdiction. These organizations are principal members of the organizations involving in growing, manufacturing, and distribution of controlled substances appearing in or destined for illicit drug traffic in the United States, and to recommend and support non-enforcement programs aimed at reducing the availability of illicit controlled substances on the domestic and international markets. In an FDA recall, there are 3 classes. Class 1, the strong likelihood that the product will cause serious adverse effects or even death. Class 2, temporary but reversible effects. And Class 3, not likely to cause adverse effects. The steps of an FDA recall includes reporting of adverse effects, followed by manufacturer agrees to the recall, followed by customers contacted, and finally followed by recall listed publicly. Terminology, you have a prefix which modifies the beginning of the term, for example, hyper or high. The root word, which is the base component, in this case glyce, which means sugar. And finally the suffix, it modifies the component of the end of the term, emia or blood. Hyperglycemia is high sugar blood. In order to combine some of these parts, you would use a combination vowel. Homework. Study for the first test, chapters 1 and 2, plus material covered in the class. Chapter 4, pages 57 to 78, and workbook pages 30 to 33 for September 27th. And you should start writing a rough draft of your research paper.